I spent weeks working on this project I had wanted to make for years, but when I finally put it on, something wasn't right. I'd always wanted to make Jaycee from Tekken, even though I never actually played Tekken. There's a lot of times I cosplay things from things I've never played or watched. I just like designs and looks like it would be fun to make, so then I go ahead and I make it. But this one had some wrestling ties to it, and I did do wrestling for a little bit. I had to stop due to an injury, and I never went back to it. But sometimes I do commissions for wrestlers. Now, if you are new around here, there's a link to my website down below. You could go take a look at the past work that I've done and get familiar with the kind of work I usually do around here. Or there's other videos, there's that too. Now let's get right into making Jaycee, and let's start with the biggest piece, the bodysuit. Now, I'm not very endowed in the chestal region, so I plan on wearing a silicone breastplate with this cosplay. I use the age-old, tried and true duct tape clear wrap pattern technique. And no need to reinvent the wheel here for under the legs, so an existing bodysuit pattern will do for this part. Everything is cleaned up on paper after a successful mock-up, and I can now bust out the shiny lycra and start cutting. For the white, I got this really pretty eggshell-looking stretch fabric, and I much rather that than the flashbang tier finish fabric. Each stretch piece will be backed with this non-stretch tight weave fabric. This is going to avoid sagging and wrinkling. Now, the pink is a bit of a flashbang, so I do apologize. And I'm also not a fan of the color either. I wanted more of a bubblegum pink, but that was going to be a tall order given the stock at the stores. Anyways, I stopped being a baby about the color and started a wide pad stitch basting of the layers together. There had to be a dart here first, and I like to sew right off the edge and tie those threads manually. It's also helpful, when possible, to sew the non-stretch side since it'll be like a non-stretch bread to the stretch interior sandwich. This is a fun puzzle to assembly line, and it's only made more satisfying when the seams get flattened. I'm protecting the fabric here with a piece of cotton to avoid my iron sticking to the seam allowance. Some fabrics, like vinyls and shiny bits in general, are sensitive to direct contact with the iron. The back I seamed up all the way so I can pin a zipper right in the center of the seam. I'll spare you the flashbang here, I just sew it up and seam rip the center seam. This is my favorite way to do zippers. And we are going to get into what wasn't right about this cosplay when I put it on at the convention. But first, let's talk about simple cosplays. If you look at a character, you want to cosplay, and you think to yourself, ooh, that looks like it'll be actually pretty easy to make, you're probably incorrect. And this may or may not have been one of those builds. Honestly, I don't really remember what I was thinking about the project. Actually, when I first wanted to make this project, I specifically waited because I thought I wouldn't be ready. But jumping into it now, I did think it would be easy. So of course there were choices that I made that could have been way better, a little bit suboptimal on my part, but I did make another project. It was Iron Mouse Racing Princess, and it was a commission for somebody, and I have a 2-part short series on making that you guys can check out if you want to see a little bit more of a successful way of making this. Definitely made some better choices on that one. Now, simple looking exteriors, there's a lot of areas being strengthened on the inside, there's a lot of hand stitching going on the inside, there's a lot of invisible things going on the inside that you don't want to show through to the outside. Things like boning. But before we get into any sort of boning, these raw edges get overlocked. I'm looking to have as little bulk as possible, so that's why I'm not folding it in on itself. The darts also get trimmed and shielded with a small piece of twill tape. The hand stitches are only going through the lining layer here. And now that that's taken care of, the borders need to be tended to, and this blue was a difficult choice at the fabric store. Luckily, it's got a lot of shift on the bias, so it should, in theory, go around curves very nicely. Except for one. Later. And that one I'm talking about is this little teardrop shape right underneath the bust that had to be lined in that blue. Believe you me, I edited the frick and the heck out of all the photos for that area just so that it would look cleaner in photos. I don't like editing my work like that very much, but it was bothering me so much I was like, I'll just do it. Now, what could have solved this issue was I could have picked a stretchy blue fabric like a lycra, but I was just dead set on having this kind of like satin finish because that's what it looked like in the reference image, and the blue isn't exactly the same. I tend to be a baby about my fabric choices a lot, especially on this costume. It reared its ugly head like twice so far. But oh yes, I'm supposed to be talking about what exactly a bias stretch is. A fabric is woven in this direction and that direction, and it forms a little bit of a crisscross like this. If you look at like a square, if you were to draw a line between one point to the other point, the diagonal line, that would be the bias, and that's because your square can kind of shift like this and shift like that, and that's why it's good to cut these things diagonally at a 45-degree angle on the bias. It can be wasteful sometimes, so if you really don't have curves to go around, just cut it straight, you'll save on more fabric. But before we can connect this lovely blue tape, the tops of these pieces need to be secured in place since shifting can still occur. And now, with the edge of the tape lined up with the edge of the neckline and a 1/2 inch inwards, it can be sewn. I'm not a huge fan of turning corners like this, but I've been too lazy to look it up for a more crisp, professional looking method, so that'll be for future me. And this project was done in like 2023 and I still haven't looked into it. It's not a bad way of doing it. It looks fine. I'm just being a little bit of a robot and I wish it was like a perfect straight line. I do know how to turn corners in double fold bias tape, but this isn't the way we're doing it on this piece. Wait, despite this most recent epiphany, I'm still going to look it up at some point. Now the biggest challenge with this is avoiding having your fabric look like a telephone wire. Here's an image for those of you who always had the cordless experience. Anyways, on fabric, it's caused by two opposite poles or strain on the inside, and that's why I am clamping the ever-loving daylights out of this as I fold it inwards and iron it down. And to a certain extent, the steam from an iron can help ease that telephone wire away, but not always. And now, the pad-stitched basting can be removed safely, and the inside of the blue tape can be stitched down by hand. So, the aforementioned horrible curved piece, I'm just gonna leave it at that. Speaking of aforementioned things, time to add a bit of boning. This is synthetic whalebone. I recommend melting the tips to avoid hard, stabby edges. I'm gonna sneak it into the back area of this blue. There's gonna be lacing here, so it needs a little bit of support. And speaking of support, I don't want my eyelets to just pop out, and that would likely happen with the fabric layers on their own, so this synthetic twill tape will help that out. By the way, I have a downstairs neighbor that like smells me reaching for the hammer to do anything of this sort. I'm telling you, I can hit something with it twice and they bang on the ceiling. I'm convinced they just stand in their living room, broom in hand, just yearning for a sound to briefly, just barely caress their eardrums. It's gotten to a point where I look out the window to see if their car is there. Anyways, I'm sure they're lovely, very fun people. Okay, now pardon my possible delivering of too much information here, everyone's different, but I am human, and as a human, I know that at some point at the convention I will need to pee. And this is why I'm making the crotch here capable of unsnapping. Still very annoying to use the bathroom, mind you, but way less annoying than having to take the whole thing off in the stall. And I'd very much like to not get arrested for public indecency charges, so I'm going to be using these big ol' snaps. Because of my structure layer and twill tape, I don't have to worry about this being too heavy duty for my bodysuit. Because this bodysuit dips down at the back, I want to avoid any sagging, so additional boning channel is being stitched into the seam allowance. It also uses the actual seam allowance as the casing. Oh, and these points and the waist get turned inwards to secure D-rings for later. On to the neck. I'm kind of just feeling around here, trying to see what I'm doing in a tiny mirror. Yeah, anyways, this is now a pattern I can use for the collar with the ends extended for the straps. And I'm lining it with that red fabric from earlier, since I don't want the black stretching. More basting and a couple shorter straps for the buckles. To turn these types of edges inside out, it's good to notch areas like this. I'm trying to do it with pinking shears here, thinking it'll go faster, but these very much need to be sharpened. Need to iron something tiny? Stick a stick through it, like a reverse clapper. Patent pending. Ta-da! Morphs into a larger, totally not different piece. Those tiny pieces from earlier go on the waist area D-rings. For strength, by the way, these pieces have nylon straps inside, just slid into it before closing. And now I can finally add some hardware. And of course, more invisible sewing for the front. Now I'm doing very tiny space between each stitch here, and I'm also locking it every few stitches. This is a very important straps in terms of public decency. The choker part of the collar also needs that non-stretch backing once it's pressed. It's layered on top, basted around the edge by machine, and middle by hand, before the matching blue border can be added. I swear so much time on this project was spent babysitting this blue fabric, but it just had the right texture and everything else going for it. I'm happy with how the collar turned out. Now it need only be connected to the faux leather part. And after that, many unnecessary rivets and eyelets can be added. Nah, they're cool and decorative. Now, for anyone who doesn't know this, for those who do, excuse me for a second. When cutting faux fur, flip it over and cut it with an X-Acto to avoid damaging the pile on the other side. And this will save you a gigantic mess, potentially. Potentially cutting away fur that you need intact, and more importantly, save you a giant mess. Just remember to flip your pattern pieces too, since now it's upside down. You'll still get some shedding, but just take care of it immediately. So my fur pieces are cut with little to no seam allowance, but my lining has about 1/2 inch. The lining is assembled normally, but the faux fur I do by hand by whip stitching the very edge. And it looks seamless now when I pull any of the trapped fur back out. And then yes, more hand sewing. Listen, unlocking hand sewing as a skill has opened so many avenues for me. The amount of sneaky things you can do, the order in which you can choose to assemble pieces, the list goes on. Now yes, these things do take time, and I say it all the time. Patience can be learned. You're not just born with patience. Sure, some people might be born with more patience than others. I didn't always used to be as patient as I am right now, and people sometimes tell me that they don't understand how I could spend X amount of time on one little thing. But let me reassure you that when I first started cosplaying, I wasn't as into the process of making my cosplay. I did enjoy the process of making a cosplay, but I was really thinking about being done and wearing it and posting pictures, and I was excited about that. One of the things I dreaded the most was ironing. Walking into the other room, I lived at my mom's at the time, I've been at this for a while, and just firing up the iron. I hated it, and now I do it all the time. I do it between steps, I do it before steps, I do it after steps. But in doing masquerades all the time and getting feedback from the judges, I started realizing I really need to stop cutting corners. So what I started doing to kind of teach myself patience as it pertains to the exterior of what my cosplay looks like, I started paying attention to the interior. So the interiors of my armors being nice and clean. That way, if I was gonna end up accidentally cutting a corner, chances are it wouldn't end up being on the front that everyone would see. Patience learned, patience acquired. Now only a few more pieces of hardware need to be added, like snaps. Let's watch me be confused here. How to proceed? No, that's not it. What are you doing? What are you doing? How does that help? I really wish I could just whisper to past me right now the answer. There we go. That's one way to go about it that works. Alright, moving on. Some pieces of a costume are better positioned on your body. At the time, I was alone here, so the mannequin would have to do. It just takes into account the curves and the natural easing based on thickness, weight, yada yada. See, imagine doing this without hand sewing. Also, I love how the snap situation from earlier was such a dilemma, but this snap situation I figured out immediately. I'll try to share more HD videos someday of what exactly that method was, since this old footage just sucks really bad for details. A few feathers glued into the pile for extra floof, and oop, can't forget this eyelet. Gonna need that later for the pendant. So before we continue with the duct tape face and head situation, let's talk a little bit about how I felt in the cosplay when I wore it at the convention. When I finally put the entire cosplay on and went to the con, I just didn't feel mentally comfortable in the cosplay as the character. And it wasn't a revealing thing because technically the only skin of mine that you could actually see was like my arms. So it wasn't that. Honestly, I don't know what it is, and it's really unpredictable. It happens to me sometimes with the cosplays I finish. This is just my first time really talking about it. It's almost like me personally, am not supposed to be the one in the cosplay. That's almost how it feels. And especially with this project, it's really weird because, you know, it ties to things that I have in common with the character, with the love of wrestling, with having done wrestling, and always having loved her design and just really wanting to make her someday. You would have thought I would have felt good in it, right? Does this happen to anyone else? Does this happen to you guys? Have you guys ever put on a cosplay and you're like, ugh, not how I expected to feel? Do let me know in the comments. I'm really curious to know that maybe I'm not alone in feeling this way. Anyways, we can circle back to this later. For now, we've got a super cute luchador mask to make. Alright, so this is a duct tape pattern of my face, but forget that for a moment. I only just recently found out that Hell's Kitchen is a real place. Before I was just so confused as to why they called the city in Daredevil Hell's Kitchen. I thought to myself, like, wow, that's a little on the nose, isn't it? Anyways, this pattern makes me feel like a pre-suit Daredevil, which is why I bring that up. And I can't say this is my first or last time I'll ever cover my head in duct tape and cling wrap. Cutting it out is easy since I have no hair, but if you have hair and do this, make sure you don't end up looking like a 3-year-old who found scissors. Okay, so this just gives me flashbacks to the time I made an actual luchador mask for a local wrestler. I went to the dojo, because it's the dojo that I used to go to pattern his head, and I did exactly the way that I'm doing it on myself in this video. And it was so funny because his fellow wrestlers were warming up in the background, and they would just keep looking at him and like poking fun at him and laughing at him, and he seemed so embarrassed to be like looking that insane. I was 0% embarrassed though, since I used to go to that dojo myself. Anyways, enough of that story time. Let's trace and cut some foam. A lot of these pattern pieces have morphed from just my head to a more sculpted, structured version. The way these pieces were separated will make sense when you see it come together. The 2mm foam is to build up a base, and the non-cosplay Lucha mask I made was just faux leather. I'm cutting these ear holes out too. I need to hear my friends, the stage, the con, everything. And in something like wrestling, it's even more important. You have to hear what's going on, your opponent, your team, your surroundings, and that's why I did the same exact thing on the real Lucha mask I made. And then I hid those holes under a fabric detail. Now, I'm not sure how much of this information is meant to be sacred, so I'll just leave it at that. I mean, not that there's any sacred information. It is real. It's real fights. It's real. This is real.
It's still real to me, damn it!
Once all these pieces are assembled, now you can see the general plan. Spoilers though, that plan's about to change slightly. But first, a little heat shaping. Oh yeah, and I added a few millimeters here and there on my pattern to take into account my head with hair on it. But still good to test it all out. Said change of plans from earlier is just to connect the center part of the front to the back for a seamless transition. I don't want to see it through the fabric. The sides are tacked down just at the ends, leaving space between the zigzag piece and the back. Okay, now covering it with fabric is a little bit more tricky since I want to have little to no seams. I ended up with a total of 3 seams, the middle and 1 on either side, and the 2 on the sides will be mostly hidden by feathers later. Those all get sewn up and ironed as much as possible. This thing I'm using is called a ham, by the way, very useful and I'd say almost essential to your sewing supplies arsenal. Now I can clamp it all up, making sure there's no wrinkles, and I can begin with the hot glue. I debated making this a seamed area as well so that it could be double-sided, but I decided against it since it'll have a border later. Now you probably thought I was going to use EVA foam for the raised pieces, but I'm using a thick paper instead. A little temporary spray adhesive to hold it in place while I trim the sides. I'm not slashing these all the way up to the edge, by the way, just close enough to allow for a nice curve. I'm also getting this blue piece ready for later, hence why I left the back of the spiked area bare. The temporary adhesive wasn't strong enough to hold my edges, by the way, so I ended up hot gluing them with a thin layer. The center of the eye pieces are left alone for now, and in case you're wondering, the marks on the mask is disappearing ink. A few of the completed pieces are glued on, and now I can tend to the eyes. This is going to make a nice, clean inner eye border that follows through to the outside. It's a little finicky, but I just take my time. Now, you may have noticed that the bodysuit is still not done. I decided to wait until I was making similar pieces for the masks to just do them all at once. So after more patterning, cutting, and sewing, I can turn these pieces inside out. I was able to sew all around these pieces and turn them inside out through a cut slit since they'll be glued down. So, the bird. Ooh, my friends, she will regret this later. Now, if you're ever working on something and you're already feeling like, I kind of don't like the way this is turning out, yeah, just stop. Please, listen to me. I've made this mistake 1, 2, 3 too many times. If you don't like the way something's turning out, stop, reflect, think about how you can redo it, maybe in a better way that'll turn out nicer. Maybe you just need to redo it in general and you'll get it right this time. You'll thank past you. Unfortunately, we don't have access to Control Z in real life, though that would be quite nice to just be able to undo previous action. So, regret will come later. Let's continue. Out of laziness. New pieces are ready to be glued on, including the ugly bird. The zigzag piece is going right over the seam to hide it and make a smooth transition. Could have been smoother. I should have patterned it again rather than use the existing pattern. Now, and there goes the bird, being glued. Some sideburns, the sideburns top layer, and oh, what's this? A bird again? A new one now, since luckily, the other one was able to be ripped off. The new plan is to add the white bird over blue fabric, seamed at the middle for the curve. Okay, so I was pretty over the bird stuff at this point, as you could imagine. Now my plan for this, because it also felt a little bit too bulky on the previous attempt, was to just have one layer. Now the problem with one layer is that you risk having frayed edges because they're not sandwiched in anywhere. Luckily, this fabric was not natural and the edges could melt, so I used a wood burner to melt the edges ever so slightly, and I did a practice piece. Beautiful. Went beautiful. Hands are steady. Mom's spaghetti. Then I got to the actual piece. It was so bad. I couldn't stay stable. It was the worst. It was awful. Boy, was I glad I redid that stupid bird, though. And now the only thing left was feathers and gems. I had feathers in my stash already, so I just had to airbrush the tips. They got cut sharp beforehand. Also, it takes 3 times as long as the actual airbrushing the thing to clean the airbrush when done. For resin stuff, I'm using molds I already have. I know the wings aren't the exact same as the reference, but again, I already had these on deck. The pigment is called So Strong, and it is true to its name. And the resin is Smoothcast 300. It cures white, so the pigment will be a bit more pastel. While I wait for that to fully cure, the back of the mask gets the same treatment as everywhere else that got eyelets. A nice strong secure strip is glued in before the edges can be turned over and cleaned up. The gems are glued on, and so are the feathers. The mask is done, but the details still need to be stuck to the chest. And to do that, I had to put it on. Yes, it's awkward, but at least this isn't my real chest. The rest can be done off of me though, and that ham comes in handy once again. A little shading and highlighting with acrylics on the wings, super glue for the gem, and it's all connected to a thin strip of ribbon. Why do I feel like this isn't the first time I've made panties for a cosplay? Oh yeah. Well, this time there's no foam butt built into it. Did you know this tan piece I'm sewing right here is called a crotch shield? Yeah, the pattern literally said that. You basically just sandwich the back piece with the front piece and the crotch shield piece so that they flip inwards like this, simultaneously hiding all 3 raw edges. I usually don't read pattern instructions when using existing patterns, but sometimes the curiosity gets me. I think it's because pattern instructions can only have so much information from start to finish, so a lot gets left out. That, and there's no one true way to assemble something. Our lovely crotch shield gets basted so it doesn't move while I sew up the sides and hem everything. No need for overlock here, but definitely a need for a stretch stitch. A bajillion clamps later, that's metric. The leg holes are now also good to go. Alrighty, so let's move on to the shoes, because Jaycee has got a heck of a pair. I got these sandals at a discount store. I was looking for something with flexibility and preferably the whatever material these are. I put on one of my Puma shoes and trapped my whole leg in clear wrap and tape. Fun fact, these are the shoes I wore to wrestling practice. How the turntables come back around. The pattern drafting process is sometimes so chaotic that getting good footage of it is very difficult, but you'll see what the pieces end up looking like. Again, these are lined just like the bodysuit. The stretch fabric must not stretch. The ultra long tongue gets interfacing for added structure, and all the edges are overlocked. This scringly looking interfacing is to create a sandwiched barrier to prevent the presser foot from the overlock machine pushing stretch into the fabric as it sews. But it still needs to be babysat once in a while. Assembly may now begin. And it's really starting to come together and look recognizable at this point. Unfortunately, our friend the blue fabric makes a comeback to line the open edges. No, it's actually fine being used here, but still needs to be hand sewn to the inside. You know what? I'm proud of my hand sewing on this cosplay. So watching the footage of like just the making of as I'm editing, or as I was editing, I'm seeing a lot of things that I'm proud of past me. Like that hand stitching, that's what made me think of this. And when I did the masquerade in this cosplay, I didn't get an official prize. What I got was an honorable mention for stage. And it's not really about the prize. It's more that when I think back on this masquerade, it's not a massively fond memory. The things that I'm fond of when looking back on this masquerade was the time I spent with my friends. But when I finish a cosplay, the masquerade for me is kind of like the baptism of the cosplay, or something like that, or like the party, you know, the completion celebration, if you will. And this masquerade just didn't feel that way. It was ran in a very interesting, different way that I'm used to. It felt really segmented and disconnected. And the judges' feedback that I got was very nice. It was very positive. The reason why I didn't get a prize, if you're wondering, is because there was another contestant that did all the same techniques as me, +1. And from a judge's perspective, since I do judge sometimes, that makes sense. When you're stuck and you don't know what to pick, the person who did the extra thing, done just as nice, that person gets the upper hand. That's normal. But as a contestant, looking back on this masquerade, I just don't feel very fulfilled. I want to look back on the completion party of this cosplay and feel fulfilled. And again, it's not about the prize. It's more about looking back, and my memories of the masquerade is just like a very confused, jumbled mess. So sometimes I wonder, what if I were to enter it again? And I could, because I didn't win a prize. I guess I just want a memory of it that's not a brain foggy mess. I wonder if that would fix my image of this cosplay. Now, I'm no shoemaker, but I am a foamsmith, so I do understand contact cement. For my seams, I just glued them down. I'm also preparing the areas that'll be getting eyelets the same way as everything else on the costume. Unfortunately, it is going to cover a lot of that beautiful hand stitching, but I can lament over that later. I'm finally ready to prep the sole. And prepping the sole involves sanding that heat-sealed texture away. This way, contact cement can actually grip into something and soak into it. This took time and patience, and you could tell that by my stance. Honestly, the contact cement would have been just fine, but paranoia struck, so I'm also adding nails to this just for a further anchor point. Also, the lining was not enough for the stiffness, so the solution is to Gutermann glue in some faux upholstery leather. Again, my language is foam, so foam it is for the inner structure. Warbler makes an appearance as well to help create the support for the heel and ankle. Also, a foam layer. If there's one thing I'd like to avoid is slicing up the back of my foot with a piece of Warbler. So the foam also acts as a barrier. For those of you who don't know, Warbler can be shaped when warm and cools off to relatively stiff again and holds the shape it was left in. Oh boy, my friends, and that's where the footage ends for that. I was really struggling with the toe region, so what I ended up doing, I'm sorry we have to do this again, was I ended up gluing, contact cementing the existing fabric, like the tongue and the sides, to that foam piece, and then capping it with Warbler to just give it a little bit more strength, a little bit more durability. And then I made an additional cap to go on top of it. That way it was just a lot cleaner, because it was not very clean in the front. But now it is. You just know that there's mistakes underneath that cap now. Alright, so only a few more pieces left. I have a glove pattern I made already, and I just have to make it longer past the wrist. Sometimes you can get away with a trace your hand glove, but not for this project, so I have to go through the whole shebang. You can sew gloves by hand, but I like to do as much as possible with the machine, of course using the stretch stitch. Once the thumb is seamed, connecting it to the hand should look like a very scary lobster trap, and these wrist straps need to be pinned in before the halves can be seamed. And once seamed together, I get to do the part I call Zoidberging the gloves. You see? Now onto the gussets. Patience, patience, patience. I like to do a little bit at a time, pin, sew, pin, sew. Maybe in the future I'll go a little bit more into detail about making gloves, but today is not that day. This video is already long. So let's skip to finishing touches. Finishing touches like elbows. First, the ends of the gloves get this black stretch piece. And sewing the circle part inward was actually super easy and went so smoothly. I connected it and then blue. For the elbow pads, foam as a base. The top is cut with an inward angle so that when it's glued, it's as close to the seam as possible to minimize sanding. But sanding nonetheless. A little bit of batting to help round it out and add a little bit of squish. Followed by a million clamps to cover it in our very lovely, bright, blinding pink stretch fabric. And the very last need for our friend the blue fabric. To create the border, I'm hot gluing it down first and then just tacking the rest with a regular stick glue. That way, no hot glue bumps will be visible. This one was another job for the Guterman. Hence the large clamp population once more. The excess can be hot glued to the inside though. At this point, I looked at this and felt it might be uncomfortable or slip, so I made a squishy blue worm and glued it to the inner edge. And here it is all together. I did a super fun photo shoot with T-Dude as well. I'll link him in the description. Now I know I said that this cosplay didn't sit quite right with me mentally while I was wearing it, but that doesn't mean that I am not proud of everything I learned working on this cosplay. And it doesn't mean that I'm not proud of how it turned out. I loved doing that photo shoot with T-Dude. I'm so happy with the photos, and they're actually some of my favorite photos too. Ironic. But my goal right now, I'm still going to be doing the bigger cosplays for masquerades, but my goal right now is to aim for cosplays that I can re-wear. And that also includes in the comfort region. Like I want to have things for Sundays that are not super draining physically to be wearing. And man, do I wish the ghoul was one of them. But the ghoul is, I have to redo the prosthetics every single time because they're single use. So I have to pour new prosthetics, and then getting into the makeup, it's a lot of a hassle to get into the ghoul. But the ghoul I am actually super comfortable in. And I wish I could wear it more often. But fret not, I do have future plans that I think will suit me just fine. Like I said, I've been at this for like 15 years now, and I'm only just now starting to figure out what works best for me. Some of us are on the fast train, and some of us are on the bicycle. Again, let me know in the comments if you guys have had similar experiences to mine. And again, thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my Twitch subscribers. Your support is greatly appreciated, and you guys have been putting up with chaos streams lately with preparation for Comic-Con, so thank you for that as well, sub or not. And of course, until next time, guys, thank you so much for watching.